PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. The women's world champion Wenjun played well in the recent Sigeman tournament in Malmö, Sweden. She finished on 50%, and that is in very good company. She gained a stack of rating points. She had a poor start, losing the first two games, but climbed back. And this round 4 game against the German star Vincent Keymer was crucial. So let's have a look at it. Fascinating game, actually, incredibly complicated. Somewhere in the middle game, Wenjun had won a piece in the complications, but it certainly wasn't smooth. Keymer had a lot of compensation, so they reached an endgame, and you can see that Ju still has the extra piece, but Keymer has 2 pawns. The king's also very active, and this is a really tricky position. So first of all, the king has to take care of this pawn. So the king steps over, king b5. Now, if king f5, that knight will hop in via d3 to take on b2. So basically, f4 has to be played. Passed pawns should be pushed, somebody said. So an exchange of pawns. King takes a5. Now that king is a long way from anywhere sensible. f5, this is really scary. That f-pawn is charging down the board, so the king can't make it back. The knight has to hop back. King d5. Now, black has a choice. Do you put the knight back on d8? Or you have the option to simplify down into a pawn endgame. Now, in these kind of endgames, there is no substitute for calculation. You have to calculate correctly. This could be a chance to win the game immediately. So before you move, let's have a look at knight e7. It might just be a winning move. So let's take a look. So knight e7, king e6. Okay, you give the knight for the pawn, and then the king comes in. So the king wants to step around here and take the b pawn. In fact, it's possible just to bring the king back, and that blocks out black's king. That would be a draw. One can even play king g4, and I hope you calculated that this race is actually okay for white. If we just go to the end, and that's just a draw. So, knight e7 check. Unfortunately for Wenjun, doesn't actually force a win. So she put the knight back on d8. Got to hold your nerve here. Now, if the king goes in to support the pawn now, well, the king will find its way over to b2. So Keymer plays cleverly. He brings the king back to attack the pawn, and that keeps black's king shut out. So now we've got a curious situation where this knight is taking care of the f-pawn. The black king would love to be able to get into the game, but is shut out by the king. So it's white to play. How do you play this one? Incredibly, there is only one good move for white in this position. Again, calculation is everything. So I'm going to hand it over to you. You have a think, I'll have a drink. White to play. How do you save this position? Keymer didn't get it right. Can you do better than Vincent Keymer? Cheers, folks. Well, let me show you what happened in the game. I think the move that Keymer made looks such a natural move. Unfortunately, it's not correct. King c5. You know, it keeps the king trapped in at the side. This is a losing move. Let's see how Drew managed to win. So knight h6. Now, what happens if the king steps back? just keeping black's king locked in. Well, obviously, if the knight goes back, then black has achieved nothing. But here is the trick. Knight g4. They're tricky beasts. Attacking the pawn. When the pawn advances, knight e5 check wins the f pawn. That's the point. So knight h6 was a very clever move. So what else can white play? Well, this is a very important variation actually. King d4. Okay, so that avoids the knight forks. So king b4, king d5, king here. This position is actually Zugzwang. So basically, however white moves in this position, black is going to win. White has to give ground. So for example, if the king steps back, then black's king comes this way, and then the knight can take here, and that's game over. The pawn goes through. And if the king goes this way, then the king gets in and takes here. So knight h6 just played. So we've just seen, yeah, king c4 loses to knight g4. So Keymer played king d5, king b5. So again, there's this Zugzwang position. White has to give ground. So king e5 played, king c4, knight here, and the king is getting squeezed basically. If king here, then the king comes back. Again, this is just winning. So Keymer played here, king d3, and knight d6 gets the knight well away from the king. So the king can't hassle the knight now. And yeah, here Keymer resigned. Well, of course, if f7, that'll be taken, and that's no race at all. So there we go. King c5 is a losing move. Let's check out some other losing moves. It's remarkable. So king d5, king b4, and this wins for black. For example, king d4 here, and once again this is Zugzwang. So the king either goes this way and the black king goes back, or as in the game, the king goes this way and allows black's king in. So let's just see that again. So what about king e6 here? Yeah, king b5, that's Zugzwang again, black wins. Or this one, yeah, well, we've seen that already, basically, black's king gets in. And what else have we got? King d3, no, that's no good at all. I mean, this just transposes to what we've just been looking at. That's the crucial position, actually, where white's king is forced either forward, in which case the king goes in, or backwards, and then the king takes the pawn. Okay, so I've shown you all the losing moves. What is the drawing move? It's very hard to distinguish between all these different variations. It's very subtle. The drawing move is king d4, the only move to draw. Now, what on earth is the difference? Well, let's check out some moves. Okay, well, first of all, excuse me, let's try king b4. I mean, this looks plausible. Okay, then king d5 and king b5. Well, what's the difference? Well, we had this position, excuse me, earlier with the knight on g5. But there's a big difference now. The king comes in, gains a tempo, the knight has to move, and then the king goes back. So in this way, white's king does not have to lose ground or give ground to black's king. After king b4, king d4, there's actually nothing to do in this position. Okay, let's try something else. After king d4, what about king b5? Well, in this case, the king steps back, attacks the pawn, and king c4, and you can see, well, the king is shut out at the side again. For example, knight g5. This is still can be tricky, but let's try this here. King c3 again. Attacks this. Okay, well let's try this. What happens if the knight steps in and takes the f-pawn? In this case, white's king gets back just in time, and in fact we reach a classic endgame position. If you haven't seen this before, well, you should know this. Let me show you what happens. Even though white is a whole knight and a pawn down, this is drawn because black's knight needs to keep hold of this, and if the king comes across to protect the pawn, then that is simply stalemate. So yeah, it's a very well-known, an ancient drawing position, in fact. Golly, a really, really difficult endgame. Yes, that is the critical position. That, I mean, this is really study-like. And, well, this is move 64 for white. And at the end of a long game, very easy to get it wrong. There's only one drawing move, and that is king d4. Fascinating stuff. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm looking forward to the World Championship match between Tan Zhongyi and Wenjun. Should be very interesting indeed.